The service manager didn't even look up from his clipboard when he said it. "Sir, this transmission is finished. There's nothing anyone can do with it." Marcus Hale stood at the counter of Prestige Auto Group, the 5th dealership in 11 days, still wearing the same faded canvas jacket he'd worn every Saturday morning for the last 20 years. The one with the small tear on the left pocket that his daughter Emma had once tried to fix with a piece of red thread when she was 7. She hadn't gotten it quite right. He'd never had it repaired. He had driven 40 minutes to get here. He had taken a half-day off work. He had waited 1 hour and 20 minutes in a plastic chair next to a coffee machine that only dispensed lukewarm water. And now a man half his age, in a pressed polo shirt with a dealership logo stitched above his heart, was telling him, without a single moment of hesitation, that the car was dead. "We ran the diagnostic," the manager continued, finally glancing up with the kind of practiced sympathy that costs nothing. "The transmission control module is throwing 6 separate fault codes. The valve body is compromised. The torque converter is showing heat damage. At this point, replacement is your only real option." He slid a printed estimate across the counter like a verdict. The number at the bottom had a comma in it. Marcus picked up the paper. He read it slowly. He set it back down. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pull out his phone to show the manager his certifications, his 23 years of independent experience, or the fact that he had rebuilt transmissions more complex than this one in a garage with no heat and a single hanging work light while his daughter slept 20 feet away inside the house. He simply folded the estimate once, slid it into his jacket pocket, next to the red-threaded tear, thanked the man quietly and walked back to his truck. For dealerships had said the same thing before this one. For different waiting rooms. For different diagnostic printouts. For different young men in pressed shirts who had looked at him the way people sometimes look at a library book that has clearly been checked out too many times. He drove home. Emma was waiting. That was enough reason to try one more time. Marcus Hale had not always worked alone. There was a time, not so long ago that he couldn't still feel the edges of it, when he had a partner. A wife named Diane who laughed too loudly at her own jokes and made coffee so strong it left a ring inside the mug. They had built something small together. A life with a modest house, a one-car garage, and a daughter who arrived 3 weeks early and spent her first hours in the world fighting harder than anyone expected. Emma had always been like that, a fighter in quiet ways. When Emma was 4, Diane got sick. Not suddenly, illness rarely arrives that way. Came in stages the way winter does. First a chill, then a stillness. Then one morning Marcus woke up and the house was permanently colder than it had ever been before, and no amount of adjusting the thermostat seemed to fix it. He was 38 years old, alone, and responsible for a small girl who still called out for her mother in the night for almost a full year afterward. He did not fall apart. He did not have the time. He threw himself into the one language he had always understood, completely mechanical. Metal and torque and tension and the particular sound a healthy engine makes versus one that is quietly failing. He had learned this language from his own father in a Georgia driveway before he was old enough to see over the hood. It was the one inheritance that had never depreciated. He expanded his garage. He took on harder jobs. Word spread not through advertising because Marcus had never advertised a single day in his life, but through the slow, undefeatable network of satisfied people who tell other satisfied people. He became the man you called when everyone else had given up. The last name on a handwritten list passed between neighbors over back fences. But he was also always first and foremost Emma's father. He coached her soccer team for 3 seasons even though he knew nothing about soccer. He learned to braid hair from a YouTube video he watched 17 times. He attended every school concert, every parent-teacher meeting, every small graduation of childhood that most people forget, but fathers like Marcus quietly memorize. He was not a perfect man. He was simply a present one. And presence, it turns out, is its own kind of genius. The car belonged to Sandra Bellows. She was not a cruel woman. That is the important thing to understand. She was not vindictive or deliberately unkind. She was simply a woman who had learned, through decades of professional success, to measure the value of things very quickly, and to move on just as fast from anything that did not meet her threshold. Sandra was the regional director of a mid-sized pharmaceutical distribution company. She drove 60,000 miles a year. She wore her efficiency like a second suit. She had a preferred dealership, a preferred mechanic, a preferred everything because preference, she had found, saved time, and time was the one resource she genuinely could not replace. The car in question was her daughter Olivia's. Olivia was 17, and Olivia and Emma Hale had been best friends since the 3rd grade. A friendship that had survived different middle schools, different friend groups, and the particular social turbulence that teenage girls navigate with more courage than most adults give them credit for. When Olivia's car broke down 3 weeks ago, Sandra had done exactly what a competent, organized person does. She had called the dealership, then another, then 3 more. She had collected 5 professional opinions the way she collected quarterly reports, efficiently and without sentimentality. When the 5th estimate landed on her kitchen counter, she looked at it for exactly 45 seconds before making a decision. The car was not worth saving. It was a 7-year-old sedan with a dead transmission and a replacement cost that exceeded its current value. The logical move was to let it go. Olivia had cried quietly in her bedroom for an hour. It was Olivia who mentioned Marcus Hale, Emma's dad, the man with the garage. She had been in that garage once, she told her mother. It was the most organized place she had ever seen in her life. Every tool in its place. Labels on everything. A wall of manuals so worn they looked like they had been read the way people read novels. Sandra Bellows had looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she had called Marcus. Not because she believed he could fix what 5 certified technicians had declared unfixable. She called because Olivia had asked her to. Because sometimes, even the most efficient people do things for reasons that have nothing to do with efficiency. She expected nothing. She wanted to be proven right about that. Marcus listened to the car before he touched it. This is something that cannot be taught in a certification course or replicated by a diagnostic machine. The ability to hear a mechanical problem the way a musician hears a note that is slightly wrongly flat. It lives in the body before it lives in the mind. It is built from 10,000 hours of listening to things that most people tune out entirely. He sat in the driver's seat for 4 minutes with the engine idling. He did not look at his phone. He did not consult a manual. He simply listened with the particular quality of attention that his daughter had once described, with the devastating accuracy of children, as the face daddy makes when he is talking to the car. Then he drove it. Twice around the block, no more. When he came back, he pulled the car into the garage, lifted the hood, and stood very still for a moment the way a doctor stands before a patient, gathering information before drawing conclusions. Sandra Bellows stood near the door with her arms crossed, watching. She had expected him to immediately reach for a scanner. Every other technician had led with the scanner. Marcus led with his hands. He checked fluid clarity and color with the focused attention of someone reading a document in a language others had forgotten. He performed a manual line pressure test using equipment so old it had a manufacturer's sticker that predated Sandra's career. He removed the transmission pan with the unhurried precision of a man who has done this particular thing so many times that speed no longer impresses him. Only accuracy does. He found it in 40 minutes. Not 6 catastrophic failures. Not a dead transmission requiring full replacement. A single failed solenoid, a component the size of a thumb, that had cascaded incorrect data through the entire control system, triggering fault codes that looked to every automated scanner in every dealership like total transmission failure. The valve body was fine. The torque converter was fine. The control module was misreading a dead solenoid the way a smoke alarm misreads burnt toast. Marcus set the small component on his workbench beside a crayon drawing Emma had made at age 6 that he had taped to the wall and never taken down. A house. A car. A tall figure with enormous hands. He allowed himself one quiet exhale. Then he got to work. The part cost $47. Marcus had found it in his secondary inventory, a carefully organized set of steel shelving units along the back wall of the garage where he kept components sorted by category, cross-referenced in a handwritten ledger that Emma sometimes teased him about because no one keeps handwritten ledgers anymore. Dad, that is genuinely unhinged. He had smiled when she said that. He had kept the ledger. He was replacing the solenoid, 40 minutes into a job that should have taken an hour total, when his phone rang. He let it go to voicemail. It rang again. He set down his tools. It was Emma's school. She had been in a minor collision on the way home. Another student, a parking lot, low speed, no injuries. But the car she had borrowed, the one he had spent 3 weekends restoring for her 16th birthday, the one with the replaced clutch and the new brake lines and the paint color she had chosen herself from a sample card she kept on her bedroom dresser for 4 months before deciding. That car had a crumpled front quarter panel and a wheel that was no longer sitting at the angle wheels are supposed to sit. Marcus stood in the middle of his garage holding his phone. Sandra Bellows was watching from the doorway. She had not left. She had intended to leave, had told herself twice that she would go get coffee and come back. But something had kept her there. Some quality in the way this man worked that she found she did not want to stop watching. She saw his face change. Not dramatically. Not in the way faces change in films, with clear, readable emotion that leaves nothing to interpretation. It changed the way weather changes over open water. Subtly, completely, in a way that tells you everything if you know how to read it. He looked at the transmission on his bench. He looked at his phone. He looked at the small crayon drawing on the wall. He made a decision in the space of one breath. "I need to go get my daughter," he said, quietly, without apology. Sandra Bellows uncrossed her arms. "Go," she said, and she meant it in a way that surprised even herself, not as permission but as something closer to respect. He brought Emma back with him. She had a bruise forming along her left forearm from the seatbelt he had checked himself 3 weeks ago, the one that had done exactly what it was supposed to do. He looked at that bruise once, the way fathers look at evidence that the world has touched their children, and then he did not look at it again because looking at it too long would not help either of them. Emma sat on the worn wooden stool in the corner of the garage, the stool that had been hers since she was small enough that her feet didn't reach the floor, and watched her father finish the job. Sandra Bellows had stayed. She had called ahead and arranged for coffee to be brought from the place 2 streets over, not as a gesture of superiority, but because it was the only useful thing she could think of to do in a space where everything already had its purpose and its place. Marcus completed the solenoid replacement, reinstalled the transmission pan, refilled the fluid, and reconnected the control module in a focused, unbroken sequence that took 40 minutes. He did not rush. He did not perform. He simply worked with the complete, unhurried confidence of a man who has never needed anyone to watch him to know that he is doing something well. Then he started the car. It shifted, cleanly, quietly, the way it was built to shift before something small and overlooked had quietly convinced every expert that the whole system was beyond saving. Emma looked up from her phone. Sandra stood very still. Marcus wiped his hands on a cloth that was folded in thirds the way his father had taught him, and he set it back in its place on the bench beside the crayon drawing and the $47 part that had defeated 5 dealerships and 6 combined hours of computer diagnostics. Sandra Bellows looked at the car, then at Marcus, then for a brief moment at Emma on her stool. She reached into her bag and removed her checkbook. Marcus shook his head once. "What your daughter and my daughter have, that's worth more than whatever this job costs." He paused. "Charge me your standard rate or nothing," Sandra said firmly. He named a number so modest she wrote it without a word, but her hand was not entirely steady. That night, after Sandra had driven away and the garage was quiet, Marcus and Emma sat on the tailgate of his truck in the driveway the way they had done since she was small. It was the kind of evening that arrives in early autumn. Cool enough for jackets, still enough to hear the neighborhood settling into itself. The kind of evening that does not ask anything of you. Emma had her knees pulled up and her coffee going cold in her hands. The bruise on her forearm had deepened slightly. Marcus had not stopped being aware of it. 5 dealerships, Emma said finally. 5, Marcus confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you know? When you first listened to it, did you already know what it was?" He considered the question with the same seriousness he gave to everything she asked him, which was one of the things she had loved about him her entire life without ever finding quite the right words for it. "I had a feeling," he said. "A feeling isn't the same as knowing. Knowing comes from the work." Emma nodded slowly. She had grown up understanding this distinction in her bones. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Not the way she had when she was 7, completely and without reservation, but the careful, conscious way of a young woman who has chosen to do something rather than simply fallen into it. That difference, Marcus thought, was everything. That she still chose this. That she still chose him. He looked up at the darkening sky above the roofline of the house where she had grown from a 3-week early fighter into someone he could not fully believe he had any part in creating. He was not a man who collected compliments or stored victories. He did not think about Sandra Bellows or the 5 service managers or the diagnostic machines that had looked at something broken and seen only the end of it. He thought about a $47 part. A crayon drawing on a wall. A red thread on a torn pocket that was still not quite right and never would be, and that was, in every way that mattered, completely perfect. Emma's coffee had gone cold. She didn't move. Neither did he. Some things, he had learned, you simply sit inside of for as long as they last.